Went to Maryland. He is a Terp, and he did his bachelor's in economics, and he currently works with CIC Wealth as a financial advisor. While on campus, he was involved as a Greek Terp and also with the men's lacrosse team. And we are going to have the ability to answer some questions today if anyone has them. So we are going to hold questions for the end of the presentation, but you can ask them, and then I will have the ability to see any questions that are asked. I think that's all from me, and I will hand it over to Mark.
Thanks, Lauren. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year. Thanks again for taking the time out of your busy schedules here today to listen in. As Lauren mentioned, my name is Mark Judkowitz. I'm a financial advisor at CIC Wealth. At CIC, we do specialize with working what we call women decision makers. Now, that's everybody from married women decision makers, single young professionals, women business owners, divorcees and widows, and everything in between. But today we're going to be discussing the various challenges that women do face with regards to financial planning, and as well as how you can better plan for your own future moving forward. I'm also going to cover some general principles and best practices for women who are looking to either start investing or build on and or refine their financial plan and investment strategy moving forward. As Lauren mentioned, I've got a lot of material to get through, so we're going to ask everyone to hold their questions till the end or type them into the chat, and we'll definitely have some time. I'm going to try and keep it relatively brief to about 30-35 minutes and then leave some time for questions at the end. So first and foremost, let's take a look at where women are today in regards to the world and the business world. So women are out-achieving men in earning both bachelor's and advanced degrees. 40% of women are their family's primary breadwinner. 50% of working women are now in management or professional occupations. And women make up 50% of the individuals with investable assets of more than $500,000. Now, women are clearly becoming and will continue to become more prevalent in the investment planning process, obviously given their stronger position not only in the world but the business world today. So next we're going to talk about some past and still absolutely current unique challenges facing women with regards to financial planning. So historically, women tended to earn less money than men, and today I believe they get approximately 77 cents on the dollar, unfortunately, for every dollar that men earn for working the same identical roles. Women also might spend about 15% of their lives out of the workforce to care for various dependents. Now that could be either children or elderly dependents, elderly parents. The result is that they receive less from Social Security and pension systems because those calculations are based on what you put into the system and how long you've worked. So not only do women get paid less, they typically spend more time out of the workforce, but they have to make those reduced benefits work for a longer period of time. Women on average live 4.9 years longer than men, and 50% of women today live past the age of 84. To take a real-world example, in 2014, with regards to Social Security, on average, men received $18,857 from Social Security versus women receiving, on average, $14,010. Now, it's important to note that these challenges are still absolutely factors for women. It's important to be cognizant in regards to planning for the future. So now I just want to take a brief look at who makes the financial decisions within households. And I know not everyone on here is married. However, married couples do make up the majority of wealth in the middle to upper class. You know, husband and wife working is not only an economic advantage, but in today's day and age, slowly becoming an economic necessity. And since women are such an integral part of the household earnings, women also may, by extension, be more inclined to participate and or really dictate some of the financial decisions within households. So if you take a look at the slide on the left, you see when the husband earns more, 35% of the time the husband makes the financial decisions, 28% of the time it's shared. And one thing that stood out to me was that 36% of the time women actually made the financial decisions when the husband earned more money. Now you take a look on the right when the wife earns more, now that 36 jumps up to 46%. That's a pretty big jump. Really what I want to illustrate here is not necessarily saying at all that either the women or the wife should, or the husband or the wife should make these decisions. It's really, really important to create good, healthy dialogue between both parties and any outside advisors so that everybody gets heard and good decisions ultimately get made together. To expand on some of the differences, let's take a quick humorous look at one of the differences between men and women and how that might affect their investment decisions moving forward. So an English professor wrote the following words on a chalkboard and directed his students to punctuate it correctly. Now the men in the room wrote, "Woman without her man is nothing. The women, of course, wrote woman. Without her, man is nothing. Now, this slide's obviously lighthearted, but I think it does illustrate a point. Men and women look at things differently. Not necessarily in the way that's outlined here, in much more subtle ways, I would think. But I thought this slide made the point pretty clear, and I always get a pretty good chuckle out of it. So let's meet 3 clients that I work with who, despite having their own personal financial challenges, are looking to get on the right path and make the most of their financial lives. I'm going to circle back with each one of these women to discuss various topics later in the presentation, and obviously I changed the identities for client confidentiality purposes. So Kim on the left is a 34-year-old businesswoman. She's married with 1 child. She and her husband earn roughly the same income, and Kim is tasked with being the family CFO and managing those household finances. Kim sometimes struggled with saving more for the future as her family expenses just seem to constantly increase from year to year. Sandra in the middle is a 45-year-old attorney. She's divorced. She has 2 teenage children. She's always earned solid money and she's been a good saver, but she's not really quite sure whether or not she's on the right track for retirement. She's somewhat weary of investing because of the recent all-time highs, as well as the volatility that comes along with investing in the stock market. Carol on the right is a 64-year-old recent retiree who unfortunately lost her husband a year ago. She does have a financial plan in place, and she feels like she's doing the right thing, but she's always willing to learn more to ensure that she does not outlive her assets. Although I know you might not have the exact situation as the above, hopefully you can resonate with some part of one of their situations. Now, let's talk about how you can get a handle on your situation, take into account the challenges you will face as a woman, and really live and enjoy life at the same time, because ultimately, that's the goal. That's the reason why we plan. So with my clients, I equate their financial plan to being a financial roadmap. Gives them step-by-step, month-by-month, year-by-year directions to get them to where they want to be in the future. Obviously, I know nowadays with Google Maps and Waze, roadmaps are pretty much obsolete, but just bear with me here. And as we know, there's a lot of different routes one can take on the road to either financial success or a destination. But let's explore how developing a savings plan, saving for your retirement and other long-term goals now, investing for the future, and then managing those investments ongoing can help you set you up for financial success. Let's go back to our friend Kim. So as we discussed, she struggles with saving. Those family expenses are just constantly increasing year over year. Now, a lot of people know how important it is to save for the future, but really wonder how much they should be saving and where and what types of accounts they should be saving into. Some even think the way that Kim did, that they can't possibly save any more than they currently are. And thinking about all that can be pretty overwhelming, obviously. I'd like everyone on the call to quickly and briefly envision where you would like to be in the future. Is that debt-free, having the ability to take your family on a vacation each year, maybe retire early so you can spend some time with the grandkids? Whatever it is, use that tool and use that vision as motivation for you to save more and more. But before we talk about how we can save, really the first essential step in creating a financial plan is to get a clear understanding and snapshot of where you are today. So that's how much after-tax income do you have coming in each month? How much in expenses, or how much do you spend each month? Do you have any debt? If so, how much? What type of debt is it? Do you have an emergency fund to cover 6 months of expenses? How much have you saved? Where is it? What types of accounts? How much are you currently saving? Now, once you take a look at some of these questions, you obviously understand that where I'm going is probably going to be starting with some sort of budget, right? You have to understand what's coming in each month, what's going out each month, is there a gap, and what is that gap? How can I use that gap as a resource for me to work or you to work towards achieving your goals? So oftentimes I find that going through this kind of healthy financial checkup and creating a budget helps find a lot of dollars that simply might be just slipping through the cracks right now. This definitely helped Kim a lot by keeping a better eye on her expenses and making sure she's still able to save today. But let's talk about budgets. Most people understand and recognize having a budget's a good way to control spending and keep track of your money. But there's so many different reasons why people either don't have one, or if they do start a budget, why they just simply don't stick to it. It can be too cumbersome, seen as a waste of time. People keep incomplete records and don't actually keep track of every latte or purchase they make throughout the month. People feel like they can be too restrictive. A lot of people just simply don't want to know, and obviously they're just not fun. But I will say it's shocking how many successful people that I've sat down and worked with who have honestly absolutely no idea how much they spend each month. So it really is a crucial step if you want to start to do better and to start to plan for your future. So because budgets are just not always the easiest or the best thing to stick to, there's a solution out there called the 60% solution that I use with a lot of my clients. So the 60% solution is an alternative budgeting strategy that helps facilitate savings, and I think it's a little bit more sustainable and easier to stick with than a traditional budget. So the 60% solution is a guideline that helps you save time by not having to account for every dollar that you spend. After all, the whole reason why you budget is to control overspending, prevent unnecessary debt, and really ultimately help you save more. So it starts with keeping or trying to keep your committed expenses at below 60% of your gross monthly income. Now, committed expenses could be defined as anything from food, necessary clothing, household expenses, household items, rent, mortgage, bills, any necessary insurance premiums you have, and any outstanding taxes. Now, 60% by no means is a magic number. It's a workable goal to think about as a guideline. Your number is probably either going to be a little bit higher or lower depending on your actual situation. Anyways, 60% is a good place to try and start. The remaining 40% of your gross monthly income would then be divided into 4 chunks of roughly 10% each. You've got retirement savings, which could be your 401k contribution or an IRA account. You've got long-term savings. Now, this is money that would not necessarily go into a retirement account per se, where you'd be penalized if you took out money early, but this could be a brokerage investment account where you can invest and it's still liquid enough so that in a pinch you might be able to, or you could still sell securities and have that cash on hand to use. Then you have short-term savings, and this is typically for irregular expenses. So this could just be as simple as a savings account or a money market account. It should be liquid, kept in cash. You can move this money back and forth to your checking account as needed. Throughout the year, it could be used to pay for things such as vacations, repairs, holiday gifts, what I would say are irregular but more or less predictable expenses. Then you've got your fun money. You can spend that on anything you want during the course of the month as long as the total does not exceed 10%. So the key here is really setting this up to automate the savings itself. So you want to pay yourself that 40% first on, say if you get paid on the first of the month, set up your automatic pulls or automatic withdrawals on the second. That way you don't really need to track your expenses because your checking account balance will generally be equal to the amount of money you can spend throughout the month. Now that's a way that a lot of people do it. Where they really find themselves not being successful and staying with it is when they don't make those automatic savings provisions first. So that is a crucial part of using the 60% solution. Today's day and age, there's obviously also technology that can help us out with some of this. There's mint.com, or the app Mint can be really helpful for tracking expenses. I know some of the banks have put out their own stuff. I think Capital One has one called Capital One Wallet. And another thing to note is that if you are carrying substantial debt that's not a mortgage, you could use 20% that might otherwise go towards retirement or long-term savings to aggressively pay down that debt. Remember, every dollar in interest that you don't have to pay is just like getting a guaranteed risk-free, tax-free return on your money equal to the interest rate on the debt that you would have been paying. And remember that once you do pay those debts off, immediately redirect that back into savings if you can. So once we've talked about budgeting, talked about getting a snapshot of where you are, it really is crucial to sit down and actually clarify and set detailed and achievable goals. Now, it might be easier to think of the finances really in the short term first as opposed to then in the long term in order to get a grasp on the things that you need to happen immediately versus things that will happen eventually. So these are short-term goals such as paying off a credit card balance or student loan, paying yourself first, and either starting to invest or investing more than you currently are. Could be having an emergency fund, a rainy day fund that can cover up to 6 months of expenses, or it could be saving for a down payment on a home. Now this list is not exclusive by any means. Obviously there's tons of other short-term goals you could have. And when I say short-term, these are meant for the immediate upcoming years. I typically classify short-term goals as 5 years or less. Now a lot of my clients and a lot of people in general are just not always sure where to start and can think of it as being overwhelming when they talk about saving for retirement if they barely have a cushion for the present, obviously. So, my advice would be the best route to take in that situation is to start small and plan for the shorter term first. And by planning for the shorter term first, you're still acting in the best interest of those long-term goals. So once you have a handle on the short-term goals, now it's important to realize again that those decisions you make still have an impact on your long-term goals. But by keeping those longer term goals in mind and giving you something to look forward to, I found that having positive associations really helps my clients save more. So instead of their retirement account or calling it saving for retirement, I have one client that thinks of it as her future travel stash. I've got another client that thinks of it as her beach house fund. As I said, positive associations have helped some of my clients not only stay on track, but even contribute and save more than they might think they might otherwise be able to. Now, I think that's especially important when you think about these goals that are clearly less tangible in the short term. So some of these long-term goals could be, as I said, the big general retirement savings, obviously. Could be paying off a large purchase or a mortgage, having a long-term care plan for later in life, potentially buying a vacation home at some point, or leaving a financial legacy for loved ones, charitable causes, or institutions. Lauren did not ask me to put that there. I just thought that was an appropriate plug. Go Turks. So we've talked about short-term goals. We've talked about long-term goals. But now, how much will you actually need in retirement? Now, that's a complicated question. Obviously, the answer depends on so many factors, clearly more than I've listed here before. But what kind of lifestyle do you expect to have? What sources of income will you have available to you? How many years do you estimate being retired? Where do you plan to live? What's the cost of living like? Is it going to be more or less than where you live today? Now, to determine the target amount of money you think you'll need, I'd recommend potentially starting with your current budget that we discussed earlier. From there, you could go line by line, expense by expense, and ask yourself, is this expense going to increase, decrease, or stay the same in retirement? For example, healthcare might go up, travel might increase, but maybe your mortgage is paid off, that might be gone, might be living in a lower cost area. It's also important to factor in inflation and taxes with this future budget, but I'd recommend calculating these numbers first using today's dollars, then incorporating potential inflation and taxes. Now, a lot of financial professionals suggest that a fairly realistic estimate is that you'll need 75 to 85% of your annual pre-retirement income for each year that you're retired. Personally, I think that's just a complete overgeneralization, and I would absolutely make sure you calculate this number in detail, either on your own or with a financial professional based on your own individual needs and lifestyle aspirations. If anyone would like, I do have a budgeting guide that I use with my clients. I'm happy to just send that out and give that out to anybody who thinks that would be helpful for them in their own planning. Feel free to just reach out to me after the webinar. So now that we've discussed how much income you might potentially need, if you can't depend on just Social Security or a pension, what are the income sources you have available to you? Well, let's start with employer-sponsored plans. First and foremost, if your company offers a 401k, I hope that you are at least enrolled and saving enough to maximize the company match if you're lucky enough to even have one. Now, 401k accounts with former employers can get confusing. You might forget about them. You might want to consider rolling those over into a traditional IRA, either on your own with a financial advisor, or you can also roll those into your current 401k plan or other retirement plan. And I've found that it makes retirement planning a lot easier for clients when they consolidate their assets and minimize the number of outstanding accounts they have. Other than 401ks, obviously if you still have a pension, that's fantastic. Employer stock option plans, if you're also lucky enough to have that. Then you've got your personal savings and investments. That could be, all types of IRAs or individual retirement accounts, which we're going to get into in just a minute. Certificates of deposit or CDs through banks, savings accounts, money market accounts, brokerage investment accounts, and for those of us who do have multiple properties, rental income. So let's take a slight deeper dive into some of these types of retirement accounts and what the real benefits to using them are. So this could be a big refresher for a lot of people. I'm sure most people know a lot of this, but I'm just going to give kind of a quick high-level refresher of each one of these types of accounts. So 401ks, first and foremost, they do offer ease and convenience. Money's typically deducted out of your paycheck, automatically contributed into your 401k investment account for you on a biweekly basis or however often you get paid. You don't have to call your advisor, write a check, make a deposit, or really do anything to save. As I mentioned before, a lot of employers offer a match. Now, matches are huge. They are the best money. They're free money. So if your employer says, if you contribute 3% of your income, we'll match you 3%, take advantage of it. It's free money. It's the easiest money you're ever going to make. So with 401k contributions, those are what's called pre-tax. So that means you don't pay income taxes the year you make the money, and it actually lowers your taxable income in the current year. So knowing that you don't pay taxes on it when you put the money into it, you do get tax deferred, or what's called tax deferred growth, where you don't get taxed every year on the gains. However, since you've never paid taxes on these dollars, when you do go to actually take this money out and withdraw money in retirement, every dollar in there, whether it's principal or gain, is going to be taxed at what we call ordinary income tax rates as opposed to capital gains tax rates. Ordinary income tax rates are typically higher than capital gains. So there's pros and cons to each one of these types of accounts. With 401ks, you also have your investment choices simplified, typically to a list or menu of selected mutual funds that have been pre-screened by the employer or whoever the employer, offers that out to. And really, as I said, they're limited to mutual funds and a select list. These are typically supposed to be lower cost and what we call, quote, the best. Not always the case, but for folks, it's a lot easier making those decisions. And they offer discipline savings through a principle called dollar cost averaging, which I'm going to review a little bit later on. Then we move over to traditional and rollover IRAs. Now, those could be used to consolidate old 401ks or employer plans like we talked about. The contributions are also typically pre-taxed, get the same tax-deferred growth. They're taxed the same as a 401k on the way out at ordinary income rates. However, the big difference here is that you have unlimited investment options within a traditional IRA or a rollover IRA. So with a 401k, you're limited to mutual funds and a select list of mutual funds. Within an IRA, you have every mutual fund out there, every ETF, every individual stock, bond, alternative investment, real estate investment trust, the list goes on and on. Now that can be a pro for some people and a con for some people. So it's good to have a nice little balance here. Also, in regards to how much you can actually contribute to these accounts, with a 401k in 2017, an individual can contribute $18,000 per year. If you're over the age of 50, you can also make what's called a catch-up contribution of an additional $6,000. So that would be a total of $24,000 a year. Now with IRAs, it's a little bit different. Unfortunately, the limits are a little bit lower. You can actually only contribute $5,500 per year, with another extra $1,000 in catch-up contribution if you're over the age of 50. Now the big difference between a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k and a traditional IRA is that these contributions in a Roth IRA are what's called after tax. So you pay income taxes the year you make that money. It goes into this type of account, gets the same tax deferred growth, but the big difference is when you go to take that money out in retirement, every dollar comes out tax-free. You never get taxed again. You avoid what we call double taxation. Now that sounds great, right? Everybody wants tax-free dollars. However, the IRS has put what we call income limits on many people for actually contributing to these accounts. So if you're an individual filing your taxes alone, if you make roughly around $120,000 or more, you cannot contribute into this account in that given year. That's not to say that you have to forfeit previous year's contribution. You just cannot contribute in that given year. Similar to traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs also offer unlimited investment options within the account. One little difference with the Roth IRA is that for those folks who do make more than those income limits, and I mentioned it for single, for if you're filing joint and married, it's about $186,000, $190,000 as a household before you get phased out of making those contributions. So for people who make more money than that, they do have a strategy that's called a Roth conversion or a backdoor Roth available to them. It's a little bit more complicated. I'm happy to get into it in another time. A couple crucial ages that are associated with retirement accounts. 59 and a half. When you turn 59 and a half, you can now start to take withdrawals from a 401k or an IRA without having to pay a 10% penalty that you do if you start to take money earlier. Also, at age 70 and a half, the IRS is going to force you to start taking out money from these accounts. Now, those are called RMDs, or required minimum distributions. Since we know that this money is all pre-tax and it's grown without having to pay any taxes on it, Uncle Sam, he's going to find a way to get his money. Best believe that he will always find a way to get his money. So that's what the RMDs are for. They force money out of the account so that you start to pay those taxes. So in regards to retirement accounts, retirement can seem obviously like a long way away, but let's talk about the advantage you get by starting out early. So in this example, we've got Susan and Joseph. They both start working at age 30, not the most realistic there, but from years 30 to 40, Susan's going to contribute $4,000 a year into her 401k. for 10 years and then stop contributing and just let it grow. So she's going to contribute a total of $40,000 as you see in the chart. Joseph, on the other hand, took a later start to saving and only started saving when he turned 40. He made the same contribution Susan did, though, $4,000 a year into the same type of account, that 401k, but Joseph invested that for 25 years from 40 to 65. So Susan contributed $40,000, Joseph $104,000. However, assuming they get the same rate of return of 7%, at age 65, Susan would have accumulated $343,000 in 414, as opposed to Joseph's $293,935. Now, the reason you see that big discrepancy is because of compounding interest and time. So Susan put in less than half the money Joseph did, yet came out with more money at the end. The role of time in building up your savings is extremely powerful. The earlier you start, regardless of how much you're saving, the better chances you will of being financially comfortable in retirement. So Albert Einstein once was quoted saying that compounding interest is the 8th wonder of the world. In my opinion, it really, really is. So if retirement seems years or even decades away, still begin contributing to your plan or your account as soon as possible. By starting young, you can help avoid having to make larger financial sacrifices later on as you approach retirement. But for the folks who are approaching retirement, remember that this extra savings is even more crucial to you because you have less time on your side. Bottom line, compounding interest is powerful and time is huge. So let's talk about Sandra and investing for the future. As we talked about earlier, Sandra's a little bit wary of investing because of the volatility in the stock market, as well as the all-time highs that we've had with this recent Trump rally. Investing really is the engine or the heart of any financial plan. I'm going to introduce some basic principles that I'm going to focus on, which are asset allocation and diversification, risk versus return, dollar cost averaging, creating an appropriate asset mix for yourself, and then monitoring your investments ongoing. So this is probably also going to be a refresher, but I want to just take the time to briefly highlight the very basic asset classes. So on the left, we've got cash and short-term instruments. Now, cash and money market, CDs, treasury bills, they're designed to be pretty liquid. They're values that typically do not fluctuate. They've got extremely little risk, but also very little upside potential, if any, at this point. Think about your bank account and the rate that you get. Maybe it's 0.1% if you're lucky. It's extremely minimal recently. But likewise, you've got very little risk or no risk. So as we see here, there's a corresponding low risk for a low investment return potential. Move over to the middle column, we've got bonds. So when you purchase a bond, you're actually purchasing an IOU. So you're lending money to whomever issued or sold you that bond. Now that could be a company, a local government, federal government, international government, and so on. When you purchase a bond, you're actually loaning that entity your money for a specific amount of time. Typically, they'll pay you periodic interest payments as well as repay your principal when that bond matures. Now, bonds in an investment portfolio are typically meant to be what's called a stabilizer. They're meant to weather the storm. Now, they typically target a modest return of anywhere from 1% to 4%, but it's important to understand bonds can lose value. So, as we talked about earlier, you have a little bit more risk, more of a moderate risk potential, but you also have the opportunity to earn a little bit more on that investment as well. Now, when you buy a stock on the right column, you're actually buying shares of ownership in the company, such as you could buy a piece of Facebook or Apple. Now, if that company grows financially, obviously you benefit. If the company loses money, you'll also be affected. Now, stock prices are not only affected by just the underlying numbers of the company. They can be affected by general macro market conditions, headlines, dare I say tweets these days with President Trump having massive implications on the stock market. And they can be pretty volatile when you think in the short term. Now, it's important to understand that each asset class, and this is just a few of the high-level asset classes, offer a certain degree of return potential and corresponding level of risk. So with stocks, you have a higher risk, but you also have a higher reward. And stocks, over time, historically, have typically been the highest performing investments. Again, because they can also be the riskiest. So I want to kind of, talk a little bit about the differences between asset allocation and diversification. They oftentimes get mixed up. Both concepts are based on the classic idea of not putting all your eggs in one basket, though. Now, the difference is that asset allocation on the left involves spreading your investments among different asset classes. So, for example, that could be deciding that you want to have, or you need to have 70% of your money in stocks, 20% in bonds, and 10% in cash. Whereas diversification involves actually spreading the investments within each asset class. So with diversification, you figure out what percentage of the various subclasses you should own. So within stocks, you can buy stocks of large companies, known as large caps, mid-sized companies, known as mid caps, smaller companies as small caps, international companies, and so on. And then within each of those subclasses, with diversification, you want to figure out how many different stocks or stock funds would you need for a broad representative mix, just as you wouldn't own all Apple stock for your entire large cap allocation. Now, both asset allocation and diversification can help lower your risk as well as protect your portfolio from poor performance in any one asset class, industry, or company. However, neither asset allocation nor diversification can guarantee you against a loss or ensure you a profit. So let's take diversification one step further. Now, I know this chart on the right is a little bit busy on the eye. I apologize for that. Across the top, we've got years 2005 through 2014. On the left axis, we're ranking each asset class as the highest performers on the top, the lowest performers of that year on the bottom. Take a look at, pick any color on here. For example's sake, let's take a look at the yellow, which is the mid-cap value. You see in 2005 and 2006, they were towards the top, high performers up here. 2007, they were one of the lower performers. 2008, same thing. And it's relatively random moving forward. Now, it's important to understand, unfortunately, I do not have a crystal ball. If I did, I probably wouldn't be giving this presentation today. So there's absolutely no way for anyone to tell you that they know who the winners and who the losers are going to be next year or next month. Because of that, you might have a better chance of doing well in the market by holding a little bit of each and diversifying your assets. So one of the biggest downfalls to investors making money and being successful in the stock market or with investing in general is letting their emotions or headlines dictate their investment decisions. If you take a look at this diagram, you see that once you start to make money, you gain a sense of confidence. Now that could lead to a false sense of confidence potentially that causes you to take on more risk than you probably should. Likewise, when your investments drop, a lot of folks get nervous and typically sell out their investments before they can lose any more money. When they do this, likely all they're actually doing is insuring a loss on that investment, as opposed to potentially staying put to catch the ride back up. Now, a lot of people, and a lot of my clients, are bright enough to evaluate and manage their own investments. However, they choose to work with me or work with advisors in general because it's our job to take the emotions out of the investment decision-making process. A lot of times, advisors act as somewhat of a buffer between clients and their money to help prevent them from making rash decisions like selling out when the market's down that could really hurt them in the long term. So I mentioned dollar cost averaging in regards to your 401k when you make systematic investments. But really, one of the easiest and most effective ways to jumpstart savings is through what we call dollar cost averaging. Now, the principle behind dollar cost averaging is simple. Invest a fixed amount of money into an investment at regular intervals. By systematically investing the same amount each period, you spread your purchases out over time. Typically, your average cost per share could or should be lower than if you invest all that money at once, hedging against what we call timing risk. Timing risk is when you try to be emotional and think that you know what you're doing, and you think you can time the market when really nobody can time the market. So this helps take that out of the equation. So if we take a look, say we invest $100 every month for these 5 months. January, you pay $20 per share for your investment. You can buy 5 shares. February, the price goes up. You can only buy 4 shares. Likewise, in April and May, the price drops to 16, so we buy more shares in those months. So if you take a look, the average price per share is $19.40 as opposed to what you actually paid cost per share being only $18.66. Now, dollar cost averaging helps put several key principles of investing to work. It's a long-term strategy that helps ensure that you invest on a regular basis over time. Helps you avoid trying to time the market. as I said, a huge common mistake so many investors make. Also helps you keep on track towards your goals and meeting those long-term goals. Again, just like asset allocation and diversification, dollar cost averaging will not guarantee you a profit or prevent a loss. However, it may help reduce investment timing risk, as well as being a simple and easy way to build your savings consistently. So let's jump back to Carol. So as we know, Carol has a financial plan in place, and she feels like she's doing the right thing by investing, but she's always willing to learn more to ensure that she maintains her standard of living, as well as the legacy that she plans to leave. Now, once your financial plan's in place and your money's invested accordingly, that's really just the beginning. You and or your advisor is really now tasked with the ongoing management of these assets. Let's take a quick deeper dive into what that actually entails. So in a bear market, or what we call a declining market, it's going to do one thing to your investments. You're going to lose money. Now, this should only concern you if you plan to actually sell your stock right away. Remember that a depressed market and lower stock prices can be a good thing and actually a great thing for long-term investors that are looking for value. So this chart is illustrating a hypothetical investment of $100,000 in the S&P 500 index stocks in June 1st of 2008. We all know what happened with the financial crisis in 2008, so let's see what happens with this money. For those who don't know, the S&P 500 is an index or a basket of the 500 largest companies in America. So if we invest in June 1st, 3 months later, this money would have dropped to $82,000. So the investor would have already lost close to $20,000. Another 3 months go by. The investment continues to drop. Now it's worth about $70,000. The investor's lost really close to 30% already. Should she pull out of the market? Now, the investor decides to stay invested a little bit longer, but at this 8-month point in February, she sees the value is down at this point down to $57,000. She's lost almost half her money in not even a year. At this point, the investor might ask her advisor to get her out now. Now, these are using actual returns from this period of time. So if the investor had gotten out of the market, yes, she would have avoided more down days and losing more money in the short term. But it also means she would have missed out on those up days when the market did rebound and bounce back. So let's take a look at that hypothetical $57,000, $57,425 to be exact, that the investor pulled out of the S&P 500 index on February 1st, 2009. That's our far left column. Say the investor was able to put the money into a savings account, giving her a guaranteed 5% interest rate. Obviously, we know when we talked about bank accounts that's quite unrealistic at this point, but let's just see what would have happened. So had she left the money invested in the S&P 500 index, 3 months later it started to rebound. Her investment would have increased to about $71,000, but still, as we remember, the investor moved this to a savings account. So her value did increase modestly, although only to about $58,000. Now, if we fast forward 3 years to the far column on the right, that savings account, which was giving her 5% per year, would have yielded a total now of $66,706. Had she stayed invested in the S&P 500, you see in this left column with the light blue, she would have an account value of $106,687. The investor would nearly have $40,000 more if she had just simply stayed put in the index, even after that steep decline. Now, we saw emotions get the best of her here, and she pulled out. So that's what I'm talking about with maintaining grounded during periods of volatility. It's important to remind yourself often the reason why you invest in stocks or stock funds in the first place. Equities or stocks have been the best performers over time, as we talked about, though they do come with significantly greater risk. However, for a lot of folks planning, stocks or stock funds are a crucial part of investing for the long term to get them the growth they need to accomplish whatever those long-term goals they have are. So once you've reviewed your investment options and you get invested and you have a financial plan, now what? You might want to use this investment review calendar or one similar to it to help you stay on track towards your retirement income goals. On a monthly basis, you might want to check that the amount that you're saving matches your target savings rate. Also want to review your account statements. Twice a year or biannually, You might want to compare your current asset allocation with your target asset allocation. So if you started out with 70% equities or stocks and 30% bonds, where are you now? Has that shifted? If so, you might want to consider rebalancing that account by taking profits from some of those winners, some of those higher performing asset classes, redistributing them to the underweighted areas so that you maintain consistency with that target allocation. On an annual or yearly basis, you definitely want to review your overall plan, evaluate that your savings rate and your target allocation, make sure that you adjust those as needed. You also want to review your retirement plan beneficiary designations. I've seen some wacky situations with ex-spouses still being the beneficiaries listed. Obviously, we always want to avoid situations like that. And of course, in regards to your life and moving forward, anytime there's a life event, it's a great time to review your overall plan. Now that could be the birth of a child, purchase of a home, wedding, or a divorce. Also, when you review your portfolio, it's important and helpful to ask yourself a lot of questions, such as are your savings keeping pace with your goals? Are your investments aligned with the investment strategy or allocation that you chose? Are your investments performing as you expected? If not, how come? Is that strategy or allocation still appropriate for you? Has your situation, your personal or financial situation, changed in any way since the last time you looked at things? Now, these are just some questions to ask yourself. It's important to review investments, though, at least on an annual basis, as well as your financial plan, because things do change. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to listen in today. Hopefully I didn't put too many of you to sleep. Here are some key takeaways that you can take with you to start to better plan for your future. First and foremost, take a snapshot and get an idea of where you currently are with your finances. Keep in mind the unique challenges that you might face as a woman. Start saving early and make it a priority. Actively participate in the financial planning and investment planning process. Use the power of compounding interest and time to your benefit. Stay grounded during periods of market volatility. Assess where you are as life changes. And as I say here, we are here to help. And when I say we, financial advisors in general are here to help. I can't stress enough the benefit of working with a professional, an independent or unbiased financial advisor. No matter how financially savvy you might or might not be, advisors do provide value to their clients in so many different ways and can be much more reasonable in terms of cost. As fellow Terps, I'm always happy to answer any questions you might have and be a resource for you, whether or not you choose to do it yourself or work with your current advisor or any other advisor out there. I honestly really just want people to have access to good, unbiased financial advice, which is really why I'm here today. And as I said before, whether that's through me or elsewhere. As I said, I do have a budgeting guide I'm happy to send out, but if you do have any questions, absolutely please feel free to reach out. I'm pretty accessible. Got my email and phone number's not on there, but it's on the front. It's 301-816-4683 for anybody looking for that. But at this point, I want to kick it back over to Lauren, see if we have any questions. We've got a little bit of time left, so more than happy to answer any type of questions.
Great. First, Mark, thank you so much. This was awesome, and I'm sure a lot of the people in here have had some great takeaways. We did have a couple of questions, so I'll just go through those and allow Mark some time to answer. A few people were asking if it's possible to send out the budget guide that you spoke about, as well as like the presentation and the recordings. Typically, we do send out the recordings to all people who were registered for the webinar. And Mark, would you be willing to share that information with us so that we can make sure that it gets included in that email?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you a copy of the budgeting guide as well as the presentation so we can, of course, share that.
Okay, great. And then the only other question that I see, actually there's a couple. So first of all, I see a question here. In general, is it best to build a 6-month emergency fund before tackling credit card debt?
That's a great question. And that's kind of one of the situations I look at for a lot of different clients. I think it's important to do it simultaneously. I don't think you necessarily have to hit full 6 months before you go and tackle credit card debt, because credit card debt is typically has the highest interest rate associated with it. Really, I would honestly, and I don't know this person's specific situation, but I would think that, maybe get a month or two of expenses under your belt and really start to hemorrhage money towards paying down that debt and getting rid of that balance because as I mentioned earlier, every dollar that you do not have to pay in interest by paying off early is a tax-free, risk-free return on your money. So that's definitely something I would focus on, is paying down the debt first. But you want to still make sure that you are comfortable and you have somewhat of a cushion in the case of an emergency.
Okay, great. Next up, we have, what are your thoughts on a 529 for college savings?
Great question. I think 529s, and I didn't get a chance to talk about them today, are fantastic vehicles for saving for college. For those who are not familiar, 529s are designated accounts for college savings only, or higher education savings only. And when you save, you get some current state tax benefits. They also are treated the way that Roth accounts are. So they're after-tax dollars that grow tax-deferred, and if you use them for qualified educational expenses, that money comes out tax-free. So great use of a 529. I absolutely think they may have a huge place. One thing I would be cautious of is making sure not to potentially overfund 529s. So if you have kids and say they get a scholarship or go to trade school, or maybe find their way without college, that money, if you do need to take it out for anything other than qualified educational expenses, will then have a slight penalty or a tax associated with it. So something to consider. I think they're a great fit if you fund them appropriately for your situation.
Great. The next question we have is, what is the difference between a TSP and a 401k?
Also a great question. So the difference between a TSP and a 401k is that a TSP is simply the 401k offered by the federal government for people who work for the federal government. So TSP stands for Thrift Savings Plan. It's essentially, all it is, it's a 401k with a simplified options. So those folks only have 5 funds available to them. It's typically the F, the G, the S, the I, and the C fund. So those are more broader macro type funds, as opposed to looking at a small cap growth fund that you might have available to you in your 401k. Both offer the same tax incentives. You do typically get a higher match, or you get a great match if you are a federal employee, so that's important to take advantage of with the TSP. But there really are no big material differences. Those are essentially the same type of retirement account, and you can roll over, once you do leave the government, you can roll those over just like a 401k into a traditional IRA if that's the route you choose.
Okay. Next question is, you mentioned that there are IRA options for households that earn over the 120,000 Roth IRA limit. Could you elaborate just a bit on that?
Yep, so you have traditional IRAs. If you are a business owner or self-employed, you have what's called SEP IRAs. If you're also a business owner, you have what's called simple IRAs available to you. And then really what you can do is, there's also various types of strategies out there that offer the same tax deferral of retirement accounts. One that comes to mind are annuities. They're treated and taxed the same way that retirement accounts are. So for folks that make over that threshold and want to save more and above and beyond what they're saving and maxing out in their 401k, they could save money into tax-deferred accounts through those outside types of strategies, which I won't get too much deeper into on this call, but there are available ways to save pre-tax, or more so tax-deferred as opposed to pre-tax, than just a traditional IRA.
Okay, great. The next one is, I have a good amount saved. Would the next step be to meet with a financial advisor to see where I can invest?
I would say so. Really that conversation is not necessarily starting with where to invest. Typically when I sit down with clients, I want to get to know their situation and get to know them and their family first to understand, okay, let's start with the budget, and let's start with getting a hold on where we are today. And from there, through that process, it does help, gives you some context towards how risky you should be or how risky you need to be to achieve those goals. So I'm a big believer in goals-based investing and goals-based planning, where you don't just go throw some darts in the investment account and hope they do well. I think it's important to have rhyme or reason and have an actual investment strategy and a targeted allocation that corresponds with your long-term goals. A lot of times I sit down with folks who do have a fair amount of money and they take a lot more risk than they really need to achieve their goals. Or likewise, I sit down with somebody who might need to be a little bit more aggressive and might need to save more aggressively to be able to reach whatever those goals are. So yes, I would say absolutely sit down with a financial advisor and have that initial conversation, and from there hopefully you can gain some context as to where they might be able to add value or help you out.
Awesome. So the next question is it fine to just have a 401k or do I also need a Roth IRA in addition?
Great question. And if you're early on in your career and money is relatively tight on a monthly cash flow basis, I'd say it's okay right now to just save into that 401k if that's all you can afford. However, if you are making contributions to that 401k, you're taking advantage of that full match, and you find that you still have some money left over at the end of the year or at the end of the month, I would definitely recommend opening up a Roth IRA as well and contributing to both your 401k and Roth IRA if cash flow allows you to. Now, the differences are hopefully as you begin to become more successful throughout your career and you intend to make more money as years go on, at some point you would then no longer be able to take advantage of contributing to that Roth IRA. So it really is a huge and a great tool for younger people who are earlier on in their careers, not necessarily making that threshold, to get money into those accounts, because as we saw with Susan and Joseph, the power of compounding interest, even if you only get $5,000 or $10,000 into that account when you're 25, if you can still let that money grow and compound for the next 20, 30, even 40 years, it's going to be really, really nice to have that tax-free bucket to draw from in retirement.
Can I just, oh, sorry, Mark. Can I just ask a follow-up question to that? So can you just, and this was down somewhere else, can you just reiterate really quickly the difference between, I guess, the 401k and the Roth, where when you pay, where it comes tax deferred or not? Can you just reiterate that piece really quick?
Yeah, absolutely, Lauren. So the way that it works is that with 401ks and traditional IRAs, those are dollars that you've never paid taxes on. So those are pre-tax dollars, and you don't pay taxes every year on the gains. So that money is going to continue to grow and compound at a faster rate than if you were paying taxes. Now, since none of those dollars have paid tax, you never paid tax on it, when you do go to pull out anything in retirement, every single dollar you take out, whether that's money you put in or an investment gain, they're going to be taxed at your ordinary income rates. Likewise, with a Roth IRA, since you're putting in, you've already paid the taxes that year on those dollars. Once that money goes into the account, you get the same tax deferred growth that you do with a 401k or traditional IRA, so you get that snowball effect where you don't have to pay taxes on an annual basis. But with a Roth, since you've already paid taxes on the dollars that went in, they allow you to take those dollars out completely tax-free. So if you go to pull out $100 from your Roth IRA in retirement, you actually get $100 into your account, your bank account to spend. If you pull out $100 out of your 401k or traditional IRA in retirement, say you're at the 33% tax bracket, you'll only net $77 after taxes for you to actually go then spend. Does that help clarify it a little bit better?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you. Okay, the next one, it looks like we're coming up on the end of time. We have a lot of questions that have been coming through. So let's do maybe two more, and then I'll allow everybody else to, obviously, or anybody who wants to follow up with Mark individually. So the next question is, do you know of a good resource for information on creating a trust or a will?
Absolutely. So I work with a number of very good and very different types of estate planners and estate attorneys in the Maryland, D.C., Virginia area. I'm not sure where you're based. I would be more than happy to make an introduction. I hate to kind of just give out a general blanket name or firm because depending on people's situations, there's better fits and worse fits. So if that person wants to reach out and we can have a brief conversation, I can kind of help match you and pair you with somebody who I think would be a really good fit for your situation.
Okay, and then next, as a new grad making about $60,000 a year, but with $50,000 in loans, how much should I allocate toward loans?
Also a great question, and that's really a function of cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on what type of loan you have. A couple of different resources out there that I've seen that can be really impactful for students coming out with loans is there's a service called SoFi, I think it's S-O-F-I, as well as Earnest, that can help either consolidate or refinance loans to help lower that payment for you. Really, it takes, as I said, it's more complicated than just a blanket answer, but I would, above and beyond, if you figure out your budget and what you need to comfortably live on at this point, and you still have money left over, I would potentially, take a look at contributing more than your normal payment to help knock that debt out sooner. As I said before with the other debt question, every dollar that you don't have to pay in interest is a tax-free, risk-free rate of return on the money. So it's huge to knock that debt out, but at the same time, if you have a reasonable interest rate and you have a reasonable payment that you're comfortable making and you have extra money, you might want to consider, also investing those dollars for, either longer term goals as well, because you might be able to make more on the investment than the rate of return on the loan. So I know that was kind of a convoluted answer without a really clear, direction there. I would say take a look at your budget and your cash flow, and if you have extra money above and beyond that first or second months of expenses, I would consider potentially, knocking out that debt and or making your normal payments and trying to save and invest. Unfortunately, I don't know the situation any better than that, so it's tough for me to really give a exact answer.
Okay, great. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, for any of you who are still listening, we will be sending out this recording and some of the materials that Mark and I spoke about. So be on the lookout for that email. And we will actually, just as like a plug for another webinar, Mark will be joining us next month. So be on the lookout for that in our bi-weekly digests too. Okay, great. Thank you so much, and I hope you all enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me, Lauren, and thank you so much for everybody who listened in today. Really, really appreciate your time.
Great. Okay, Mark, I think you actually have to end it.
Okay. All right.